do you want to trade Christopher Morel? No, because I believe there's more there. The results will come. That's how I look at those types of things. Welcome into Northside Territory, Foul Territory Network's Cubs podcast. I'm Sahadev Sharma with Patrick Mooney, your Cubs beat writers at The Athletic. We're going to preview the second half for the Cubs, maybe give some predictions here, Patrick. I have one that I'm ready to unleash that is not surprising, that I will get yelled at by both you and our friend Jesse Rogers.
Okay, what do you got?
But I'm going with Christopher Morel having a big second half. Those expected stats are he is going to live up to those expected stats. I'm saying it, and here's why this is why I want to do this. I stuck with Kyle Schwarber over and over and over again, and then I jumped off the boat at the wrong time.
Man down.
Yeah. And I made the mistake of not just sticking with my gut, and sometimes it doesn't work, right? My gut said, Seiya Suzuki was going to have an MVP, get some MVP votes this year. That doesn't look very likely. So I'm sticking with him. Kyle Schwarber. If expected stats were a thing when Kyle Schwarber was around, I think he would have been like a king of them. Back in I'm pretty sure like that first half in 2019 was like one of those things where if I would have been paying attention to expected stats, I would have been like, oh yeah, I can see this second half coming. And then he was a monster for 2.5 months, right? The final 2.5 months of 2019, and then 2020 happened, and we know the story from there. But this, that's why I'm sticking with Christopher Morel, because I stuck with Kyle Schwarber and jumped off too quickly, or not too quickly, but right at the wrong time. And so I'm going with that as a key reason why I think they're going to stick around. I'm not going to predict that they make the playoffs. I don't trust that, but I think they're going to stick around, and the offense is going to be a little bit more consistent. I'm not ready to go full bore on the offense again, but
they did score the 6th most runs in baseball last year. I don't know if you heard about that.
Is that true? Okay, it's interesting. No, so that's I'm jumping right off the bat with a Christopher Morel. Maybe it's also been the All-Star break has cleansed me of watching him and being like, I don't know if this is frustrating. Ground ball double play with the bases loaded. Are you kidding me with this guy? So maybe I've just like refreshed myself, and maybe he has as well, and he'll take that Sunday 2-homer game and the motivation from Jim Edmonds and go with it.
Yeah, that was classic, because I feel like pretty much every team has some sort of dumb elaborate home run celebration team wide now, like I feel like that's pretty commonplace now. Like I don't think Morel has ever done anything out of the ordinary, and he's like the friendliest guy ever. Like if Jim goes around the Cubs, would see how he's always like shaking hands with the umpires and going out of his way to point at the opposing dugout and wave before his first at bat. So no, Christopher Morel is an absolute gentleman. He's a pleasure to be around. Super positive, and like I'm with you. Like if you look back at what I wrote throughout the offseason, like players like this don't just like fall out of trees, right? Like he's got a lot going for him. My point was, and I think you started this way just to troll me and Jesse, is that no one cares about the expected stats at this point. I don't care how many, like if that would have been a home run in 27 other stadiums. Like it is all about results at this point. And I'm glad you mentioned Seiya, because how many home runs has he hit as a Cub?
I would be guessing. I would say it's 3 seasons, 60.
So he's hit 47 as a Cub.
Okay.
How many home runs did Kyle Schwarber hit last season?
40 something, right?
47.
Yeah. Okay.
So it just becomes one of those things where like this is a sprint. They have to win, and no one really cares like how well thought out any of those moves were. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it made sense. Like Counsell kind of looked around and was like, who else is going to play third base? Like, sure, there was some belief and curiosity about Morel, but it was also like they didn't have a ton of options. And like Say is a fine player, but like he needs to come up big here. I mean, we need Cody Bellinger to get healthy and be that slugging presence in the middle of the lineup that he really just hasn't been thus far. But him and Mike Tauchman, as we've discussed, have been sort of similar, and that's not really how this roster was imagined. So I think my prediction will be the Cubs will finish with 83 wins again. They won't sell, and they'll just miss the playoffs. That, to me, is how this is lining up. Just a total repeat of last year, and then a kind of, I don't know, some sort of reckoning. We'll see.
Here's something funny. Mike Tauchman has a 115 weighted runs created plus 123 ISO, right? So that's about power. ISO is about power. Cody Bellinger has a 108 weighted runs created plus and a 141 ISO. So slightly more slug.
Yeah.
But not a ton more. And like they're kind of similar players this year. It's very odd. You know, and I guess that's not like we shouldn't be shocked. Like Bellinger last year, there were all the batted ball numbers. We had all the data. We talked about it. You know, it was analyzed to death. So, you know, and then you look at the years before that, and you kind of like this shouldn't be a shock to us. There's a reason the Cubs and 29 other teams were hesitant to give him the type of deal that a superstar would deserve. So I guess we shouldn't be shocked, but I'm a little surprised at how similar those two players have been this year. We could certainly debate about who, speaking of expected stats, who we would expect to have a better second half. Or like who has a higher ceiling. Sure, I get all that, but I'm just like, when I look at Mike Tauchman's stats, I'm a little like, why does this guy, like, why isn't this guy appreciated more sometimes? But I don't know if this was clear because I wrote he'll be back after the break. I'm pretty sure we were told he'll be back on Friday. I should check my tape to be 100% certain. Like, I'm 99.9% sure that's what we were told. He's back Friday. There's not like a like, oh, maybe this, maybe that. It sounded pretty certain. So that, yeah, I think that is going. I'm very curious to see how that plays out. We've touched on that already. Christopher Morel has to play. They need power. Like there's no reason to think about changing what they do there. I think for me, when I look at the second half, and yes, the offense is a big question mark, right? Can they be consistent? Can guys like Morel and Dansby Swanson and the catcher position, whatever, all the things we've talked about, can they step up? What we saw for 90 plus games out of the pitching staff, the starting pitching staff, that was a surprise to me. That completely, I thought they could be average-ish, maybe a little bit above. With I expected Tyon to bounce back. I wasn't sure how good Steele would be. I wasn't sure. I thought Shota had a high ceiling. I wasn't sure about it. Steele has solidified himself for me. Jameson Tyon had a brilliant first half. We'll see if he can keep it up. I think he's not the guy he was last first half. He's probably not this good. Maybe he is. Maybe some things have been figured out for him, and he's just a steady presence there. I think for me though, Shota's second half is what I'm most curious about. We had some hot days, we had some humid days, right? Like there were ups and downs at point. Obviously, you look at the overall numbers and they're impressive. So we've both talked to plenty of people behind the scenes, both with the Cubs and all around baseball, who were scouting this guy. I think there are still some questions as to how he's going to handle lineups and if the fastball isn't as effective, if it's not moving like he needs it to, how does he get through lineups without a lot of damage? Nobody that I talk to is like the wheels are going to completely fall off, right? Nobody, I guess that's always on the table, but I didn't get anybody like, he like people seem to think like this guy can pitch. Okay. Like he can pitch. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's sub 3 ERA the rest of the way, but he may run into some speed bumps, which he already has, right? I like that he's bounced back, but I think that's who I'll be watching as far as, okay, like, yeah, you proved a lot to me. It proved a lot to everyone, right? Counsell kind of said like he's got nothing left to prove, right? To him, right? He trusts him, but yeah, I still want to see these final 2.5 months how good he can be.
He's thrown 97 innings thus far, and if you go back to the prior trip to St. Louis, which I believe was Memorial Day weekend, and there was a rain out, and they just pushed Shota back several days, so he essentially got a week off. And at that point, Counsell said, he's trending towards 170-ish innings, which would not be like out of the norm from what he had thrown in Japan, but obviously like there's different stresses and pressure points here, and it's been amazing to watch. I think it was cool to see him in the All-Star game. I think he's on the cover of Chicago Magazine, their best of issue. Just has been really refreshing to see him perform, and just his attitude, his curiosity, all of that stuff. But Cubs are still 4 games under, hitting on best case scenarios with him and Michael Busch. They're 2 primary guys that they brought in. And, as I was thinking about this episode, man, I was like, what has to happen for the Cubs to make the playoffs? And I'm like, all of it has to happen. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's not like you can isolate 1 or 2 things, because the Cubs have had, stretches of just like greatness throughout this first half. And I was kind of laughing when I saw the graphic during the All-Star game. I think Fox said this is like the first time 12 teams are within 3.5 games of a playoff spot at the All-Star break. And it's like, guess where the Cubs are? Number 12. Like, they got a ton of work to do. And it's like, is this going to be one of those second halves where, like, all right, the offense picks up, it's a nice time to hit at Wrigley, but then, like, the bullpen blows it late? Or is there going to be, when we go back to Wrigley Field this weekend, there are going to be some of those updates? Oh, we didn't mention this before the break, but, players X, Y, and Z are dealing with the following issues. You know what I mean? It's just as it stacks up. And I do think they have the depth to withstand some of this stuff. In talking to players, I think there's a feeling like this is a better roster than last year, but they're just not playing any better. And that is really like the root of the frustration. I think that gives you, some optimism if you're a Cubs fan, but it's also just like, it's almost 100 games in here and they have a losing record, and a lot of the stuff that has popped up as issues were not exactly surprises going into the season, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Nobody should be shocked that the bullpen is rocky, right? Nobody should be very surprised that Christopher Morel's defense hasn't solidified and is, he's not like a plus defender at third. I think they're like catcher is probably solid. Like we shouldn't be surprised by that. That was a 37-year-old Yan Gomes, and
we're kind of lulled into a false sense of security with that one.
Right,
because okay, this is post Wilson, but yeah, it's been among the worst in baseball, as you've written.
Right. I'm not going to get carried away with whatever 8 at bats from Miguel Amaya or whatever it was. But I think fans.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying.
I think the optimist fan can look at that and hope that that was something that they figured out, right? It was post whatever they worked on.
Mm-hmm.
You'd like to think that that's real. I don't know. I like it's 8 at bats. I'm not doing any analysis on that right now. I need to see a lot more, but that's a major. I think that is like, I think there's two things. There's one thing that we've been talking about for years, and that's finding a superstar, right? Like, I think the next thing maybe on our list is find a catcher, find an everyday catcher. Maybe it's Miguel Amaya, but you cannot assume that.
No.
Unless he has 2.5 brilliant months and you're sure, like, okay, he just took that step. He needed the work and he got it, and he needed a half season to adjust to what it's like to be an everyday catcher. But unless he does that in the final 2.5 months, I don't know how you go into 2025 and say, like, he's our starting catcher.
Oh, no chance.
Right? Yeah, you just like that'd be really tough to swallow. I think the other aspect that I'm really fascinated to watch is the bullpen with regards to youth and the trade deadline. And I know we've touched on this, but I think you look at the numbers since June 1st, it's a better unit. Results wise, right? It's a better unit. And this is not like, I can't express this enough. This is not unusual. It's how bullpens work. Bullpens are volatile. They change on the fly, especially if you're adding younger players, especially if guys are getting healthy. I should go look at the numbers, but I don't think Arizona's bullpen was very good in the first 4 months of the season. They called up a bunch of guys at the end. They got Ryan Thompson, I believe, who was a DFA, maybe a small trade with Tampa Bay.
Oh, you're talking about last year, before that World Series run? Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that sounds right.
And there was Sal Frank who came up. There was another guy, Grink, not Grink, Ginkle, Grink.
Zach Greinke.
Yeah. Ginkle was the other dude. And he, these guys that nobody knows, random relievers that are called up, right? Nobody outside of hardcore prospect nerds and us media people know who Hunter Biggie is, right? Or that's just the reality of the situation. But he could impact this team in the final 2 months. So how they reshape it, and I don't think it's going to be dramatic unless they go on a little winning streak. Maybe they get a bigger arm, but I think there's a way to make it maybe not a strength, but maybe not an obvious weakness, just by getting healthy and having a little bit of a youth movement there.
Yeah, I'm curious too. We were talking about this off air. How does this schedule look to you, Sahadev? Obviously, they got to have a good homestand. Diamondbacks, Brewers, going to KC, you'll be there. That's a wild card hopeful. And then basically one game in Cincinnati before the deadline. The deadline's the 30th, but that's a 7:10 first pitch in Cincinnati, so that would be beyond the deadline. What does the rest of the way look like? What is kind of that path of getting to October?
I mean, they have according to Tankathon, by winning percentage of their opponents, it's the 20th easiest or 20th hardest schedule. So what is that, 11th easiest? And but they're tied with the Mets and Yankees, not far behind teams like Detroit, Baltimore, and Atlanta. So teams that they're chasing also have easier schedules. Atlanta, San Diego, San Francisco, they're all ahead of them in the wild card standings, right? The Mets are ahead of them. It looks, it's certainly doable. You look at the tough teams, it's 3 against the Phillies, 3 against the Yankees, 3 against the Dodgers. So nothing 7 or 6 games against these guys. They only have 3 left with the Brewers. It's really weird to think about that.
Yeah.
They have the Marlins, they have the White Sox, they have the A's, they have the Rockies. You have those 4 teams on your schedule: Sox, Marlins, Rockies, A's, post trade deadline.
Yeah,
that's big, right? That's the type of thing where you can rattle off a bunch of easy wins and hopefully save your bullpen and things like that. Those are the types of things that help you like gain ground easily. I will say this, I'm looking at this, it shows like toughest opponents, easiest opponents. The Cubs show up in a lot of other teams' easiest opponents.
Yeah, that's
right?
the thing. Yeah.
So, and I wrote this at the beginning of June when they had that stretch. Like either they become
Right. Yeah.
the team, like either they clean up against these teams or they become the team other teams want to face. Right. I don't think they were there for a brief moment. Right. They were the team other team wanted to face when they were just couldn't buy a win. After this week, they're probably feeling themselves and feeling good. I know we talked about this briefly. Like, does this hurt momentum or whatever, quote unquote, or the break? I think it's good for everyone. Like these guys play these guys play and grind. Guys like Dansby Swanson and Ian Happ who get very little time off. Nico Horner, like most of these guys just are playing every day. Like I think Morel had a day off he's had 2 days off in the first half.
Wow.
Granted he's a DH for the most part. Like a lot of that is DH, but still, like that's, these guys don't take, and Counsell is one of the better ones about this, right? He's really good with that. And I think we're going to see some of this. And I think we didn't really talk about this. Saturday's game is the loss. Saturday's loss, the tough loss, not the blowout loss to the Cardinals, is a good example of him showing how he's going to he may be willing to lose a game, quote unquote. Again, I'm not saying he wanted to lose that game, but he's willing to take a loss if it means saving a guy for August and September. I think Mark Leiter threw like 13 pitches in that. Tyson Miller had like 10. He could have had pushed both of them or one of them, right? Instead of pushing Porter Hodge. Well, Porter Hodge hasn't pitched as much. He's not worried about riding him right now.
Yeah.
He needs to be careful with Tyson Miller. He's used him a lot. He needs to be careful with Mark Leiter. We saw what's happened already this season to Mark Leiter and what happened last season. He understands those things and he's willing to say like, well, I've got to push Porter Hodge today. That's what I got to do because in August and September, I need to make sure Mark Leiter's arm isn't barking again. This is you can complain about that loss and how he used his guys if you want to, but this is how you keep a bullpen healthy. This is how you keep guys ready for later in the season.
And pitchers appreciate that of like, if your win probability is say like whatever, 18% or lower, of just like chasing that, improbable win versus trying to set things up for the rest of the series, the next homestand, the rest of the month, the entire second half. Like that is supposed to be the Counsell difference. And, I think we both appreciate interacting with Counsell. Like I think he's a really like interesting guy that does not really come across during those taped TV marquee shows that the briefings have become, but like, he has this air of authority. I think you had gotten a good observation from Nico of like, he just has this like focused consistency, like day to day, that like he is all about that game. Like, he used to wear khakis and work in the front office, but he is very much like in the moment, hyper focused on like what's right in front of him. And it's really interesting to hear just how direct and simple he communicates. But like, I don't know, we all thought the Cubs would be better in 1-run games than 14-20, right? And,
right.
You mentioned our buddy Jesse Rogers, and this is one of the quotes that we've referenced that, Jed said upon hiring Counsell when we were all at the GM meetings last November. And this is quote from Hoyer. "My thought on Craig, as I've always watched him against us, was the Bum Phillips quote about Bear Bryant, where he says he'd take his and beat yours and take yours and beat his." That's kind of how it felt sometimes watching him. He was just getting the most out of his teams over and over and over. That's completely true. I mean, we saw that in Milwaukee. I mean, it frustrated me when Jed to no end. I don't think anyone watching this team is like, wow, man, the Cubs are just like, so fundamentally sound. And like, oh man, the Cubs, they just always seem to like, push the right matchup button. And oh man, look at them like escaping with yet another win. It's been kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think that's all on Counsell. I think Counsell, the consensus opinion, great hire, like a guy most teams, if you were starting like a franchise tomorrow, like he'd be on that short list of managers of like home run dream hires. There are things far beyond his control. There are issues that have been like years in the making, but this is what you sign up for when you come to manage the Chicago Cubs. Leave your hometown team, get the biggest contract for a manager ever. Oh yeah, and your old team is lapping the division again. So, like, I'm really curious to see like how he kind of goes about this. Like, it's always up to the players, and he would say that as well. Like, he's not to his credit, he's not like a me guy. He's not like, oh, I think this. Like, he's very much about the players. He played a really long time, and that goes a long way in the clubhouse. But like, you are what your record says you are, right?
Yeah, you can't run from that. You can't, just like last year. And I believe in all those things. I believed last year that they were a better team than their record was at this point in the season, right? Like, because the metrics said that. But it doesn't matter. It's just like what you were talking about, the expected stats. Like, yes, I believe Christopher Morel is doing things well, process wise. Ultimately, all that matter are the results. Like, we have to accept that. Like, you can say, like, there's, when you analyze this stuff, when you look at it, it's like, what are you trying to break down when you talk about that stuff? It's like, well, do you want to trade Christopher Morel? No, because I believe there's more there. The results will come. That's why I look at those types. That's how I look at those types of things. The advanced stats don't say this is a better team than they are. Maybe a win or two. Maybe maybe they should be like 500 or something like that. But I agree. Like, is it on Craig Counsell? I don't think so. Has Craig Counsell been a difference maker yet? Like, would we grade this an A+ season for him? Not yet. No.
Chance.
And this is not saying like he's a problem or he's holding them back in any way. It's just there were things that people look at that they thought a manager had made a big difference in. I'm not sure that they're there yet. And that could be it takes a little while for him to implement the things he wants to. Maybe he doesn't have the type of players that he fully wants all across the board. There are things I'm sure that he's going to adjust. I mean, this offseason, we're not going to talk about this now, but I'm sure there are things that we'll dive into as far as tweaks. At least we can call them tweaks, maybe bigger changes. I don't know. There are things he's going to want to do, right?
Yeah.
He's had a year, or he will have had a year to really see how this organization is run. And it's not like he's short on opinions or thoughts. He's not afraid to share his point of view. He's also not afraid to hear opposing points of view. I've talked to plenty of people in the front office who are like, when he'll come at you, he'll come at you and your observation. And he's done this with me. Like, he'll sometimes say like, well, that's obvious. And I'm like, yes, but, and I'll explain like why, like, it's a little more than obvious. It's not just obvious. Yes, that observation is obvious, but XYZ, and I'll explain the thinking. And he's like, okay, that's what he's doing is he's pushing you. He's like, he's trying to get more out of you. He's like, don't just give me the surface level. Tell me what's going on. If you have a point, let's get to it. And he's very, he's very good about that. He'll challenge you, and he expects more out of the people around him. I think that's going to make the team. I think that's going to make the organization better in the long run. We haven't seen the full results yet. So yeah, it's impossible to say like he's been this difference-making impact hire just yet. But I do believe there's more there to come. I think you nailed another big observation for the second half. The impact Craig Counsell has on this team. It'll be hard to measure. And maybe it's something that we'll understand more in the offseason. a year from now, whatever it is, things will come out, right? And we'll understand things better. But I think that's maybe one of the bigger storylines going forward.
Yeah, and I wrote in the Athletic of like, this is about the handpicked players that the front office chose and assembled for this year. I'm not, a lot of the answers will have to come from within, and I don't mean bringing up some guy from AAA or like, anointing Hunter Biggie as a closer, but I do think it'd be interesting to see like who steps up here, right? Like this is really a time where like organizations are put to the test, and like you kind of can't talk around it anymore as the runway for the season just gets shorter and shorter and shorter. It's like either you're winning or you're not. Like your young talent is either kind of rising to the top or it's sort of getting exposed. And like these players too are like at a point, I'm talking about like the nucleus of core players are in what should be like prime age seasons, right? I mean, these guys have had a lot of experience. No one's like 37 years old. Like they're in that sort of sweet spots of their career. And it will be kind of fascinating to see how they perform, particularly after last September. Like I don't know how much that matters, but like that team was very good on defense up until the like most important part of the season. You know what I mean? Like they were, and I'm not just talking about a fly ball, like that's just a thing now, but like even Dansby, it was just like the team just
plays
for crisp those last 3 weeks of September. And so like, I think, the Cubs can come out here if you win 2 series against the Diamondbacks and Brewers, particularly after a very good road trip through Baltimore and St. Louis. Like there it is. Like there's your momentum. I think you can feel pretty good about letting this team sort of run its course. But man, if they get like swept by the Diamondbacks,
right.
All of a sudden things look totally different. And, I don't think this is going to happen, but I mentioned the possibility too. Like if they sweep the Brewers have not looked that good recently. I mean, they always look good against the Cubs, it seems like, but like they got off to such a hot start. They've kind of come back a little bit here. So like they don't quite control their destiny, but they have a great opportunity here to make it a meaningful second half, or they could waste it away. I don't really have a great feel about this team almost 100 games in, and we watch it all the time. Our job is to think about it all the time. Don't have a super great gut feel either way. Either you sound like a hater or you sound like this blind optimist thinking like, oh yeah, it's going to come. And I think internally that's kind of the way they look at it too. I mean, they're pretty dispassionate. They're there every day. Like, I think they're just kind of waiting to see how this goes.
Right. And they'd been waiting for things to turn for a while.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And then it finally did the last week before the break. So I completely agree with that sentiment. Like, I don't know. I usually, sometimes I have like gut feels or feel strongly about something. I don't. I like the 2 months of just lost offense. It was over 2 months of just no offense and just, when the offense did show up, the bullpen was terrible. Like just all that stuff happening, suspect defense at times, all that stuff happening really made me question what I was watching and how good the team was. I do believe that, like, I kind of agree with your 83 wins and just short of the playoffs.
Totally.
Yeah, but I don't. I also don't think, like, I'm not ruling out a playoff run in a really good second half or a complete collapse and just like they get disinterested in September and things fall apart. Who knows? Who knows what happens? It's so hard to read this team. It's been a very odd 3.5 months to cover. But we will continue doing that. I'm very I don't know what the pitching lineup is for Arizona, who they have. I'm assuming they're having Gallen come out, but maybe they don't. It's not on the probables on MLB.com yet, but that just means it's not official. So someone like Steve Gilbert or Nick Pecora may have tweeted it out and we just missed it. But I expect that's going to be, like the Cubs owe Arizona some revenge, right? Like they're the ones that essentially knocked him out of the playoffs last year. I think, what was it, 5-1 in September? Arizona went
6-1.
6-1. Okay, there was a 4-game set in there. So so they owe him. We'll see if they can exact revenge and kind of get the second half started right for them. Again, no feel for it, but we'll be here. We'll be back. I'm going to be out of town. I'm not sure when I'll be back. Patrick and I will figure that out on our own. But Patrick will be back next week. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe to Northside Territory on your podcast medium of choice. Make sure to subscribe to The Athletic and read our work. We will be on top of the Cubs. I will be you'll hear from me again when the Cubs head to Kansas City. Looking forward to that. It's been a while since I've been to Kansas City, so looking forward to that. And thanks for listening, everyone. Patrick Scott, you covered for the next week on this big homestand to open up the second half. Thanks for listening. Take care.